Welcome to the Thrive Today podcast. I'm Natalie Bourne, the media host for Thrive Today and the founder of Innovation Meets Leadership. We are a podcast for women who lead and believe. Today, we are speaking with one of our cover girls, Jacquel Tucker. You may recognize that name from one of the covers of our Thrive Today journal, and she has become an entrepreneur in 2016, not only in business, but in leadership and also purpose strategist, which I love. She thrives by helping others to ignite and maximize their purpose, their passion, and their potential. She also has a nonprofit, and she's a published author. So we're going to talk all about that today. Through her My Purpose on Fire Academy, she helps professionals solidify their identity and build their brand and launch it. And then she's also a purpose-driven business person who focuses on businesses and nonprofits. I mean, she's just awesome, and I cannot wait for you guys to meet her and learn a little bit more about Jacquel. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's so amazing to be here. I adore you and all that you do, and also what Thrive represents. So it's exciting to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us. And I would love, in your article, which was just incredible, you kind of talk about this amazing life journey that you've had. And I would love for you just to tell us about that a little bit so that our listeners can just learn more about you.
Absolutely. It's so funny when you're going through this life's journey, it doesn't feel amazing. It's when you look back and you say,
yeah,
look what the Lord has done. So I grew up in rural Jamaica. So 8 siblings, my dad, a pastor, my mom, a youth director. And so we didn't have much. We grew up, there is no running water. We cook on a wood fire. There are, several instances. I remember going down to the little shopkeeper and asking, hey, can we get whether 2 pounds of flour or rice to make dinner, and we'll owe you the money for it just so we can get food to eat. And so looking back, that was such a significant time for me because I had to get a handle on where I was coming from, what I was going through. And so I share in Thrive about my Lazarus story because it really sets the tone for who I am today and this fire and this purpose, because now I get it. Now I get why he brought me back, because that was a question I kept asking. So, between 5 and 6, I got really ill in Jamaica. None of the doctors knew what was wrong with me. And I lost all my hair. I couldn't really walk anymore. But I do remember a vivid memory was every week, the members of the church would come to the house. I would sit in someone's lap and they would fast and pray all day. This would happen once a week. And so, it's grabbing a hold of these experiences and how God brought me back, and prayer brought my lifeless body back. My parents, the church my dad pastored was outside of the community. When they would leave to go, they would be gone all day and come back early evening. And my mom will tell you, it's so raw for her where as she was coming back, she saw my grandfather. He met her and he was crying, and he said, while you were gone, while you were away, she passed away. She is gone. And my mom screamed and ran into the house. And my uncle's wife next door heard her, and both of them came and they started crying and praying and lifted me up to God and said, you cannot take this child. And she said, I then raised up and said, look at Mom and Miss Clover praying. And from that moment on, she said, I recovered. I was off to the races. I would not go out and play when I came home from school. I have to do my homework first. I have to do all these things. And so I became very disciplined. She said, you would not wait for your brothers and sisters to go to school. You by your little self would get up. If they weren't ready, you were gone.
And that was when that purpose, right, first ignited in you from going through a pretty tragic and terrible time. Just again, I mean, as you look back on that time, they still don't know what happened or what was going on with you, right, health-wise, to saying, even at that early age, there's a purpose. I have to have discipline because there's a purpose.
And it's so funny now, Lee, because I felt like something changed in me, and that was it. And I couldn't put my finger on it as to why I was so focused on school and getting good grades. But really, God showed me later because this is the way He was going to do it. He was going to do it through education. And He knew what I had lined up, He knew what grades I needed to have, He knew how I needed to position and apply myself. So He put that in me because for a lot of people, it didn't even make sense where I was from. Why would you be so focused trying to do all this? You're only going to get so far because of poverty,
Wow.
because I didn't have people speaking for me, no experience with people, even in the well-developed areas. We had no connections to try to help me get anywhere, right? And so it didn't make sense. But all I knew was I needed to be first or second in my class. I needed to have A's. B plus was the lowest standard. And I was just focused on excellence in doing the best I could.
Wow. Well, talk about your corporate career and then how you made that transition into the world of entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. So, can I tell you? So, focusing on studying that way eventually landed me a full scholarship to the University of Maine, just
Wow.
out of the bushes, the country in Jamaica. And there I studied hotel and restaurant management and tourism. And so eventually I went back to Jamaica. And so hospitality became my lifeblood. I worked for the Jamaica Tourist Board office. I um, helped manage a cruise ship here in Ocho Rios when the ships would come in, and I reported those stats to the Minister of Tourism. And then I fast forward, returning back to the US, where I worked the front desk all the way up to a director of sales and marketing position. So I really, really excelled in hospitality. I've worked in the New Jersey market, in New York, and then transferred here and worked in the bucket market for 8 years. And so I really applied myself and I understood that I was on assignment. I worked unto God always. And so that showed in the results with myself and with my teams that I managed. And so at some point, though, you realize that you had a goal to earn this much and to get to this position and to live in this place and to buy this car and the clothes and all the things. And then you do that and realize, like, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. I was missing something. You know, my dad was a pastor, but I was not a Christian. I was in and out of the church. And so I had a timeout. I had surgery for fibroids in 2015. And as I laid on my back for 6 weeks,
Oh,
God said, this is now. This is now when you need to follow where I want to lead you. And what happened in that space was he showed me where I needed to do more in giving back. I would send a couple barrels to Jamaica, but it was, you need to give back. And so it was starting this nonprofit, launched that with Sean. And the current climate of the industry and the breakneck pace and not being able to rest and take time, he said, that's not for you anymore.
wow.
And that's when I stepped away.
Wow. That's so good. And I know that there are people listening right now that are thinking, "Oh man, you're talking to me." So tell me a little bit about some of the things that God birthed as He shifted you out of corporate and into entrepreneurship. I know that He helped you to birth this nonprofit organization that you founded with your husband. Let's talk about that a little bit.
I love that you use the word shift because it's exactly, what it is. And the shift is scary because it's so funny. That was the year that I got my biggest bonus ever. And I said to myself, but it's getting ready to be good, God, and you want me to walk away. So sometimes it looks too good to walk away from, but obedience. There are lessons to be learned when we're disobedient. And I didn't want to learn that. And so for me, I really got to learn about the power of God. I thought, I'm excelling in hospitality. I'm doing great. And yeah, this is the power of God. But when you walk away and you walk in that calling, so here's an example of the power of God. So we start this nonprofit. We go to Jamaica with my parents to test it out in 2015, 3 barrels, just us. And we served the community with what we had. And, it seems so impossible. And 4 years later, we go back to Jamaica. Each year we would go back, the team would be growing, but 4 years later, we go back with 42 people from here, including half of that a medical team, doctors, dentists, pediatricians. And we serve communities in Jamaica, over 2,500 people. We did 3 school improvement projects doing like a 6-day period. We had another 30 volunteers on the ground. So just massive. And when you look at the power of God, because honestly, we weren't getting that type of money to do that. But it's when you go forward in the will of God and what He's calling you to do, you may not see how it's all going to happen. But when it comes time, that appointed time for the job to be done, He makes a way.
Wow. And I just hear as I listen to you, don't despise small beginnings, because I think a lot of times we would look at you at the 4-year mark and say, that's impossible. But you would have said that too at the 1-year mark, like, or at the 1-month mark. And so don't despite that. Stepping out in faith, right, will eventually lead to that big idea, that big plan. Start with it small and then build it big. And I love that God did that in a 4-year period. But so often, right, we look at where you might have been 4 years later thinking, we can never do this. We can never, this is impossible, right?
Absolutely. And it's okay what you said, because one of the things that I know God dropped in my spirit as I was starting out and that I share with people now is, start with what you have, start with where you are, start with who you know. Just start. Just make one small step, because He is the one doing the heavy lifting. You look around and it seems the impossible is getting done. And it's because you were faithful to that small step God asked you to take.
I love that. And I love how we don't have to have the whole picture. We just have to put our one foot in front of the other and do what God has called us to do. What is right in front of us? And I like what you said. What are the resources you have right now? Who do you know? Who can you reach out to? What's around you right now? And I would even love for our women, as they're listening to this, just to stop and that idea, that thing that they have in their heart, to just pause for a second and say, stop kicking the can down the road. But who do you know right now? Who do you have in front of you that you could even pick up the phone and have a conversation with about your idea, about your dream? Write that name down, right? Don't stop right now. Keep listening, but write that name down. And then at the end, be faithful to pick up the phone and call that person. And because there's something about what you're saying, there's the obedience of God and taking action right away.
Absolutely. And sometimes it seems so small. It's a phone call that you need to make, right? It's to show up at an event, whatever it is. It's to wherever God is leading you. It's to send that email. And you're like, where is this going to go? It's to share that post. Yeah. Where is this going to go? Right?
Yeah.
Because really, that's how I've also ended up here. The miracle itself on the cover of Thrive.
Yes. Right. Well, I even think about, these things that seem so small, but they're just little like walks of obedience in our life, and they add up. And I'm sure that you could look back at all the steps of obedience that you took for us to be having this conversation and for you to be on the cover, and just how awesome all that has been. But it was these little steps of faith that you took, and it didn't happen overnight.
It didn't happen overnight, and I would say the biggest part of that, it just requires you to show up. And God is showing us where to show up in different places. And like I said, you may say, oh, nothing's going to happen there, or, that's not going to go anywhere. But He knows what He has planned for you. He knows the people He has lined up to propel you forward. You don't know them, right? And so we can be discouraged by that, because like you said, we don't see the big picture. And if we hesitate in doing that, we miss the opportunities. This is where we become delayed. We're not denied, but we're delayed because it's taking us longer to learn the lesson of obedience. God is faithful to His promises. He's still going to do it. Just going to take longer until you learn to be obedient.
So I love that. And I want to talk a little bit about your coaching business. Like, what was in your heart when you launched that? And then talk a little bit about what you do through that. Again, all folding back into this idea of purpose.
Yes, absolutely. As the pandemic hit and I was no longer doing my hospitality consulting company, because in addition to my nonprofit, I had launched that as well. I was sending task force onto hotel properties in sales positions. I was doing sales leadership and customer service training on property and at hotels, national conferences. And so with hospitality, that kind of shut down. And now I was focused on the nonprofit, right? Because that suddenly took on an even greater life of its own. And as I walked that journey out and through COVID, and we were working with USDA food trucks, we were serving up to 2,000 families per month here in Georgia, and we were serving over 10 communities in Jamaica. It was just mind boggling. And when I got out of it, I said, God, where do we go from here? Because I've been on this journey lockstep with the Holy Spirit. And it's like having the conversation. Okay, where do we go from here? And, I distinctly heard the voice. You get it. You have found your purpose. You have set it on fire. You are a purpose on fire. And I want you to help other people get to that point. Whether I've called them to launch a business or a nonprofit, I want you to help them get there. Because sometimes, and what I've seen, Natalie, there is not sometimes a belief that it can be done or even why or what God is calling us to do. But He's given me the foresight to recognize that. And I'll share with you how to recognize that so I can carry that hope and know that it is possible. I can carry it for that person until I can hand it back to them and say, here you go. Now you believe, take it and run with it.
Yeah. Well, that's so powerful because I just love, just in general, what coaching does. It opens your vision and it opens your opportunities, right? When we open our vision bigger than what's in front of us, bigger than what we can see, it opens the opportunities that exist for us. And that's the beauty and the power of coaching, is that, you know, oftentimes in our own abilities, we kind of stay in a box, right? We kind of stay in this boundary. But when you have someone asking you powerful questions, it breaks boundaries. It kind of breaks these false pretenses or these false, rails we put on ourselves. And it really enables us to break free and truly find our purpose. And I want to ask you, if someone's listening to this and saying, okay, I'm convinced Jacquel's done it. She's found her purpose. I can hear it. I can see the steps that it took, and it wasn't all in a big straight line, right? There were some twists and turns to the story. What are some things that our listeners can do to start to lean in and to find their purpose too?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm glad you mentioned steps. It's so funny how the Holy Spirit works. You're giving the word, and this is what I take people through. It's a step-by-step process. And it's really looking at, first of all, you've got to slay Goliath. There's been something standing in your way all this time, and we've got to find that and slay it and know that God has given you this purpose from before He placed you in your mother's womb. And people who may not even know what that is, there is a way to find that out. If you ever want to know who you're going to become in life, go all the way back to when you were a child. There was a certain nature in you, certain things that you gravitated towards, that God is the one who placed it inside of you. And so it's looking at how He's woven your passion, that the things that you love to do and that you do for free, right? And the skills that you picked up along the way, the experiences that you've had, the really impactful ones that, you've just grown so much through it. They've really changed your life. When you look at all of these being woven together, the things that people are naturally coming to you and asking you about, asking you for help with, because they see you as the one. Sometimes we're so close to it because we can't even see what He's called us to do, but other people can see it.
Yeah.
And so even with walking the journey out with someone, find someone that you can have the conversation with, where two can come in agreement about what God has called you to do, and to be able to solidify it, which is what I do, help you solidify it, help you to set it up, put it together, brand it, and launch it out. And, to be able to recognize too, You have your tribe. You are in your own lane. And so it's to stop looking around at other people and what they're doing. And sure, they have a similar purpose to me, but we are all different. We are all called to impact a different group of people. Even with you, Natalie, say we were doing the exact same thing. There are certain people that when you speak, they will hear you. And then there are other people that will hear me
Right.
because that's how what God has placed inside of us.
Yes. Our unique wirings. Like you said, even if we're doing the exact same thing, we've had different backgrounds, different experiences. And so God has placed these unique wirings in us that are different. And you're right, when someone's speaking, they're picking up on those differences, those uniquenesses, and then they're drawn to them. And that's so special because I think what you're leaning into here, and it's so important for us to say this to women, is there's room for you. There's room for everyone at the table. It's not a scarcity mentality. It's a abundance mentality. There's room for you. And sometimes we just need to hear someone say what you're doing is important, even if it's similar to someone else's, but also there's room for you. So just because they're doing it, it doesn't negate what you're doing. And Jacquel, I want to share that God spoke to me probably started around 2019 about starting my Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. And I was arguing with him, just arguing and arguing and arguing. And a friend of mine during our fast, Jacquel and I both go to Victory Church. During our fast, uh, a friend of mine was sitting next to me and she spoke, "Hey, the Lord says it's time to start your podcast." I mean, it was that specific, which is kind of scary. And I said, "About what?" And she's like, you and God know." And when I looked at that, I talked to a few friends about it, which is always a mistake, right? When God gives you a word, don't go to the spies, right? Who are going to tell you opposite. And I had so many people tell me, well, we don't really need that. There's already so many podcasts out there. There's already so God can sometimes even give you a word, and then someone else is going to bring a word of discouragement. And you count on it to try to seal that seed, right? And so I just found it so interesting that, yeah, we already have that. There's so many out there. But to your point, Jacquel, what I can bring to the table is different than what someone else can bring. And so just remember that. Remember whatever the dream is you've had, even if people have discouraged you from that dream, if God has placed it in you, he'll help you bring it to pass. It doesn't matter what other people might tell you to discourage you about that dream.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I've always said to people is this, until all of the problems in the world are solved, until everyone finds their purpose, until no one has any challenges in the area at which the enemy has attacked them, then sure, there must be enough people out there. But that is not the case. And so it means that the kingdom needs more laborers to get the job done. So there is room, yes, for everyone.
I love that. What final thoughts would you leave our listeners with today? Would you help to just have them think about how to have a purpose on fire? I loved the title of your article. It was so much fun, Purpose on Fire. How would you help our listeners have a purpose on fire?
All right. Oh wow. I get a little emotional when I talk about this because the way I found mine was to do well in any area of your life. If you could just go to the end goal and what that needs to look like or it's going to look like, it helps you get through the moments. It helps you grow through it. It helps you stay focused and get there. So I would say to everyone, you need to go all the way to well done. You need to live your life every day for well done. Because at the end of the day, Matthew 25, God has blessed you with skills and talents. And then Jesus himself gave us the Great Commission. So hand in hand, we are here passing through, just doing his kingdom work. We're here temporarily. So let's not get sucked into all the enemy has created for us here and to obstruct us from doing damage to him and his army. We serve a powerful God, and he wants to use us in powerful ways so that when we get to the end, we can hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And it starts with doing one small thing, one small step of obedience.
Jacquel, you are so inspirational. Just your story, the life that you live, the way you do things, the way you communicate. It's just so inspirational. How can people find you? How can they follow you?
Yes, absolutely. I am on the social platforms. First of all, you can also go to mypurposeonfire.com to find me. I am also on Instagram. If you search Jacquel Tucker or My Purpose on Fire, I'm on Facebook as well. And I am on LinkedIn as well because I am in the entrepreneurship space, the coaching space. But I've got to share with you, Natalie, that led to another phone call where, I'm helping individuals and a city came calling. So I am actually now helping the city of East Point to solidify their brand, build their identity from scratch, and launch them to the world. So I'm a part of an amazing team to do that. And so I'll say to everybody, show up. And so on these platforms, I do my best to show up, and that's where you could find me.
That's so amazing. I love that you shared that right there at the end. And again, how those steps of purpose just begin to open doors for you. Jacquel, bless you. Thank you. It's been a joy to be with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. Likewise.
Well, thank you for joining the Thrive Today podcast. We want you to be sure to follow, subscribe, and share this episode on all your social media platforms and tell other women in leadership about this podcast. And look, if you haven't taken an opportunity to get into community, I want to ask you a question. What are you waiting for? Head over to thrivetoday.com and join us on this journey. You'll hear from voices like Jacquel's and many, many more. We look forward to seeing you, and don't forget to thrive.